Let's design the Galactic line. Today we're going to start to build the rig that we're going to end up using to do all of our character customization. So let's talk about that. Now keep in mind that this would still be the same whether we were talking about characters that look like hand puppets or characters that have 100,000 polys. We still need to have these basic facts, these basic methods working. So what are these basic methods? Well, a rig is normally used to animate characters like this. And that's what I've been using right now. I've got a rig that lets me animate the characters and it works fine. But this doesn't allow me to customize the characters. So what I have been doing is using blend shapes to customize the characters, shape keys. So for example, here is the character getting muscular. Here is the character getting heavy. You know, you can do a lot of cool stuff with this that can't be done easily using bones, but it does mean that you've got to do a lot of shape keys, and you've got to create shape keys for every body. And you've got to create shape keys for every piece of clothing and all sorts of other disastrous stuff. Also, these shape keys modify the shape of the neck and the seam here. It's not a huge deal because the head will have the same shape keys. But the point is that if you were going to import a new head, you would have to make your shape keys match the exact same seam in the exact same way. That sounds very, very hard. So I like the idea of doing some bone-driven body morphs. So Uma does bone-driven body morphs entirely, and they have a variety. This bone here is not part of Uma's basics. I can't delete the bones there. So using Uma's system, you can scale up bones like this, right? And that's fine. That's a standard method. That's what I can do right now. But the problem is if you scale them along just one axis, then when you rotate a later part of the arm, it'll change shape, which is obviously not good. So the way Uma resolves that is by having a different bone that's attached, a leaf bone. This bone isn't attached to any other bones, and therefore it can be scaled without affecting the other body parts. And you can scale it on just one axis if you'd like. I think this is a good start. I don't think it's going to be good enough. So we're going to talk about my ideas on how I'm going to be building my version of this. But keep in mind that this is not my version. And one of the things that I've really taken a disliking to is this facial rigging system. This is awful for trying to create facial expressions. It might be the worst rig I've ever tried for trying to create facial expressions. I mean, it's possible, but you have to really, really tweak absolutely every element with absolute precision in order to get anything. And there's some stuff that can't be done. You can't wrinkle your nose. Your cheeks can't bulge convincingly because all of these pieces are set up so that you can change the shape of the face, and they're in the wrong spot for animating the face. So let's look at a system for animating the face. This is the default Make Human facial rig, and it's pretty good. I like it. And how easy is it to create facial expressions? Well, these have been chosen and mapped very, very well, so it's super, super easy to create yourself some convincing facial expressions. So you can see how quickly and easily I did that. It didn't require very much in the way of effort at all. And you can also wrinkle your nose, which is something you can't do in Uma. This is my favorite, though. This is probably the smartest thing I've ever seen in rigging, and I don't know whether I don't have a lot of experience with rigging facial expressions, so maybe this is common. But the key here is that this is the only bone that actually has verts mapped to it. All of these other bones don't have verts at all, but they do change the way in which this bone moves. So all the verts move relative to this base point here. So if I rotate this last bone, it gets this really, really aggressive skewing that gives you kind of a cartoonish nyah sort of expression to it, right? If I do it from here, then the expressions are all formed from the end of the eyebrow, which gives them a very soft sort of a feel. And if I do them from way out here, then there's almost no skewing at all. And it gives you kind of a very solid feel that is very easy to get subtle expressions out of with just a very small motion. And that allows you to get a lot of personality out of just 3 bones. It's very nice. So I think that this is a much better facial system than Uma has, but you can't use these bones to change the face of the shape of the face. It just doesn't work. It's really, really awful at trying to do that, and that's because it's not what they're built for. Now you could try to put both bones in the same system. So you could have like a, porcupine's bones here that stick out in every direction and let you scale those bones to change the shape of the face. But then every vert has to be split between some number of those bones and some number of animation bones. This here is an example of what would suffer. This happens because these verts are so carefully weighted. If the verts were weighted less, then they wouldn't follow as closely. And as the system went around further, the skewing would start to skew. And it wouldn't be nearly as easy to use or as convincing. So you can't really do that. And I think in the end, there are a couple of other options, like I could swap skeletons. But I think in the end, using shape keys for the facial shapes is probably a good idea. I like it because it allows me to create a lot of personality for each mesh. And if modders create their own meshes, they can also create a lot of personality for those meshes. So every kind of mesh would have a different idea of what it meant to have, a bigger nose or whatever. And that would allow everything to feel unique. So even if someone decided they wanted to use the same mesh and just paint new facial morphs, it would feel completely different. And I think that's great. That's a great idea. And of course, those all animate reasonably well with these facial keys, except for one detail, the eyes. As I've mentioned several times, we need to be able to move the eyes around. And I don't know what this bone is supposed to be for, but it's actually just what we need to move the eye around. Now, I haven't painted the eye socket, so keep that in mind, but you'll get the idea. So the idea is you can move this bone around to change how high and how low your eye is, or to change how wide and narrow set your eyes are. A little bit of weight painting will make this work fine. Or, much overlooked, how deep and how flat your eyes are set into your face. And those will all change the core shadows on the face. How the light hits the face will change when you do those things. And that'll give you a much, much faster recognition of the characters and a much higher variation between them, because I don't plan to use the absolute soft movie lighting that Sims 4 does. I don't think we need another bone to move the mouth. I think that we can just move the eyes relative to the mouth and that'll be fine. But we do need a couple of bones to move the neck. Now, why is that? Because we have these shape keys which change the shape of the seam that the character has. And that means that if you were going to create your own head, you would have to create the exact same shape keys that adjust your neck in the exact same way if you wanted to attach it to the same head. So your choices are either re-implement all of the shape keys with a new body to go with your new head, or we can put in some bones here in the neck that can make your chin softer, that can make your neck flow wider. And I don't think those are particularly hard. The only question is how well they can animate. Let's talk about that now. Sorry, my mouse is really, the mouse wheel's going nuts. So let's go ahead and edit this, and let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's create a new bone that goes out here. So this bone here is going to be our shoulder bone. And what we're going to do is we're going to just set this up so that we can use it. One of the problems with creating the bones the way that they're created in Uma is that it's very hard to get realistic characters. So if I want this shoulder to be fatty, if I want, a real heavy character who's got a lot of fat on their shoulders, how do I do that in Uma? Well, you can scale up the whole arm a little bit, maybe. You can scale up this part. It doesn't really look fatty, though, does it? It just looks... well, you can, move it down, but then you're deforming the whole arm in a way that doesn't really make sense. You gotta do things really carefully, and it's a little bit complex. So, how do you do it? Well, if you want to have the shoulder soften and fall off, all you need is a new bone, which you then weight paint in here. The shoulder does not fall off. That is hyperbole. Oh, that's way too dark. There we are. So now that we've painted that weight in, what we can do is we can see what happens when we maneuver this bone. So if we scale it, you see that we can quickly get a muscle here. We've got a muscle that specifically scales. Now this part up here will probably have to be modified, or we're gonna have to be more careful with exactly where we put these bones and exactly what we do with them. But the point is that the scaling can easily create an actual muscular character rather than a character that's the exact same muscles as everyone else. And if you scale it down, you get a weaker shoulder. And what if we wanted a heavyweight shoulder? How about we rotate it? Yeah. And that'll give us that soft sloping shoulder feel. We can also move this in and out and up and down. So right now I'm thinking that the biggest weakness of the UMA system is that it doesn't really move the bones around. It's all about scaling. I mean, there are a couple of times when it does move the bones around. These, for example, when you wanted to have shoulders that are wider, you move the shoulder bones. But that's not really the focus. It's really focused on trying to get these to be in the right. There we go. G. It's really focused on trying to get these to be scaled, and I think that that's a mistake. I think that almost all of the things I do need to have both rotation and translation in addition to scaling. Let's do another easy example. So let's talk about characters that are fat and thin. Over here in UMA, fat and thin is controlled primarily by these here. So you do something like this for fat, and it doesn't look too bad, right? But it looks kind of cartoonish, and it doesn't go very well as you get bigger. The larger you are, the worse the look gets. But what's really terrible is the skinny. If you're trying to get a skinny character, it's not going to look very convincing at all. So this is as close as you can get to skinny, and that's just like wearing a corset. That's not really gaunt. So how do you, and that's how it looks in their demo as well. I'm not just making that up. So how do you get the proper weight for those? Well, you can do it, and I'm going to show you how right now. What you do is you add some more bones in. So this here will be our fat bone, and this here will be our skinny bone. We're going to go ahead and unconnect it. Unconnect this too. Move this whole bone. Like this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to weight paint the model. So this is our fat. This is a character that has a lot of weight. Now, not every single piece of the body will be controlled from this one bone. Obviously, I'm not going to paint up here, for example, even though there are things that change when you get fat, because it would look very, very strange. Although it might be funny, so let's go ahead and just do a little bit of work. But really what we're trying to paint is here. Something like this, maybe more like this. But anyway, you cut it. That's the basic idea. Now this is a very soft paintbrush right now. I think that's at 0.2, and we're not even on auto normalize. Now for skinny, what we want to do is we want to paint the region directly underneath the rib cage, like this. So now that we've painted those, what we can do is we can scale them and see what happens. So let's talk about the fat bone. As we scale it, you can see that obviously the shoulders didn't work out, but the belly sort of does. Now, there are a couple of issues with the exact weight painting here, but the basic idea of having a belly that looks like this, instead of a belly that looks like this. Oh, yeah, the belly that looks like that is terrible. This sort of belly doesn't feel realistic to me. This sort of belly does, aside from the fact that it's got a really, really awful case of bad weight painting. The basic idea here is good. And moreover, we can rotate this to allow for different kinds of belly shapes. And we can even move it. So you want your heavyweight character? This feels like it would be a more realistic belly shape than the other model. Aside from the fact that the weight painting is in dire need of work. So let's go ahead and do a little bit more work on it just to see what it's like here. That's way too much. And obviously we need to smooth it, but I found that blurring doesn't actually do very much. Maybe it's because the strength is too low. Whoa. Well, anyhow, the basic idea is sound, right? You understand the basic idea back there? You in the back not paying attention? You can get a fatter character if you are more careful about how you set up your bones and where the core of the bone is. The problem with the Uma character is mostly in where this bone is located. So if I were to Alt-S and then tab in and then move this bone up and back like this, and now scale it, it's a much more realistic belly, isn't it? So why isn't it there? Well, the answer is because the guy who made it didn't want it to be there. He wanted it to be in line with the original bone for some reason. But if we were to put it back there, I don't know why I didn't think of that first. Okay, so we need to move it up. All right, it looks like I will have to work with this more to try and figure it out, but the basic idea is here. Now, how about skinny? Well, this is where the idea really shines, because with skinny, you can really feel that the bones have existence. The people, the person's bones, not the armature's bones. And you can move these with rotation and scaling to get that rib cage to look like it actually exists. And this allows you to get really gaunt-seeming characters. Now, if you can't tell the difference between this kind of gauntness and this kind of gauntness, then there's something wrong with you, because they're not the same thing at all. This is a much less realistic kind of gauntness. It feels like a cartoon character wearing a corset. This kind of gauntness feels like someone who's probably actually skinny. Now, as I mentioned, not all of the body is controlled through a single bone, so there would need to be other things that would have to get tweaked, like at the neck here and stuff. But I wanted to show you this idea. I wanted to show you how it works. I wanted to remind you that this works with men and women. It works with all clothing, and it all works great in terms of automatically just working. The facial morphs won't get along well with other facial morph stuff, but the only time that would matter is if you were wearing glasses. Or other kind of facial decorations like nose rings or something. We'll have to think about that some more later, but I think that's pretty minor in comparison. So let me know if you understood this, and let me know if you think I'm making any kind of terrible mistake. I'm going to spend the next couple of days working on this. Hopefully I will have a randomizer available for you next Saturday, and you'll be able to create random characters. Right, that's it. Thanks for listening.